The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised.
Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
Where strange lights speed beyond reason across a clear night sky.
The house at the end of the road where disembodied voices whisper and strange noises make the living shiver.
Lurking shadows hiding on the edge of the woods just outside your back door.
Odd, true events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole. I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hey, welcome all you fellow wanderers.
Yes, welcome.
So Beth and I have had a pretty busy week. We've been working on a brand new website that we're pretty proud of, and we'd love for you to check it out. It has all our episodes and a place for you to contact us.
Yeah, if any of you have questions for us or suggestions for topics you think we should look into.
Yeah, or if you live near a haunted location or know of any creepy urban legends.
Or if there's just something weird you think we'd like, let us know.
Yeah, just give us a shout. Check us out at whereourmindswander.com. So, enough housekeeping. What are we going to talk about tonight, Beth?
I'm going to talk about something that has fascinated me for years. When people, especially very young children, seem to have extremely detailed memories of a past life. So I'm talking about reincarnation.
Oh, cool. You know, I've always been fascinated by the James Linenger case. He was that boy that was born in 1998 who believed he was a WW2 Navy pilot whose plane was struck down by anti-aircraft near Iwo Jima in 1945.
Yes, his case is probably one of the most well-known. There are some really good documentaries on him. But I decided not to include him tonight, though, because his case is already so well known, and I wanted to focus on some lesser known but equally as intriguing cases.
Yeah, that's fine. You know, so if you people want to know more about him, you can Google him.
For sure. So on May 5th, 1957, 6-year-old Jacqueline Pollock and her 11-year-old sister Joanna walked ahead of their parents to church in Hexham, England, with their friend Anthony, who was 9. A car in the opposite lane hopped a curb and hit all 3 of them.
Oh, no.
Yeah, the driver was under the influence of barbiturates and painkillers, and she killed Joanna and Jacqueline almost instantly, and then Anthony died en route to the hospital.
Oh.
Police later discovered the woman who had hit them was in danger of losing her own children, and the British court committed her to a psychiatric hospital. On October 4th, 1958, Jacqueline and Joanna's parents, Florence and John Pollock, brought home their newborn twins, Jennifer and Jillian. So it might get a little confusing. Jacqueline and Joanna were the older sisters. They were the ones who were unfortunately killed.
Okay.
And Jennifer and Jillian are the newborn twins.
Alrighty.
So, although Jennifer and Jillian were identical, Jennifer had birthmarks that Jillian did not, which apparently is extremely unusual. Even more unusual, one of Jennifer's birthmarks mimicked one of Jacqueline's. They both had a thumbprint-shaped mark in the same place on their left hip. Another birthmark on Jennifer's forehead also seemed to mimic a scar Jacqueline had had in the same spot.
Interesting.
Yeah, which could be coincidental, but not when you look at the other evidence that I'm going to talk about. When the twins were 3 months old, the family moved to Whitley Bay. In her grief, Florence Pollock had boxed up Jacqueline and Joanna's toys and stored them out of sight. Around the time Jillian and Jennifer turned 4, they started asking to have certain toys back. Like, not just asking for toys, but to have their old toys back.
Oh, that's kind of creepy.
That's a little creepy, yeah. And to Florence's surprise, the twins seemed to remember their deceased sister's toys as if they were their own. They correctly identified each one according to the names given to them by Joanna and Jacqueline, and they divided the toys up exactly how their sisters once did. The twins also referred to these toys as gifts from Santa, which all of them had been.
Well, that'll make you scratch your head.
Yeah. So eventually the family returned to Hexham. The twins had never been there before, but they immediately began pointing out landmarks, like their sister's former school, for example, and a playground the previous sisters had loved. Once moving back to Hexham, Gillian and Jennifer developed an anxiety about moving cars, erupting into a panic each time they saw one. Reportedly, both girls would cower and shriek that the car is coming to get us. Getting the girls to cross the street was an everyday struggle.
Oh, I can imagine those poor girls.
I know. Their mother, Florence, however, remained unconvinced for many years that Gillian and Jennifer were reincarnations of her older daughters. But when the twins suddenly started remembering details from the accident, she slowly changed her mind. On at least one occasion, Florence witnessed Gillian lying on the floor of the girls' room with her head resting in Jennifer's lap. Jennifer was stroking her sister's head, telling her there was blood dripping from her eyes because a car had hit her.
Oh, my God.
Yeah,
I mean, what do you do at that point?
That's super creepy.
Yeah.
Dr. Ian Stevenson, a respected psychiatrist and professor of psychiatry at the University of Virginia School of Medicine, heard about the twins and contacted the family. Stevenson also had a deep interest in reincarnation. He wrote about the Pollock twins in his book, Children Who Remember Previous Lives, A Question of Reincarnation. After the girls turned 5, their memories of their previous lives faded, and they no longer had memories of the car accident. However, in 1981, Gillian claimed she had a series of visions in which she played in a sandbox in Wickham, England. Gillian could describe the town in detail, even though she had never been there, but her older sisters had. So, many skeptics will point out that in the retellings of the Pollock twins' story, it's often left out that the girls also had 4 older brothers. Well, I shouldn't say older, they had 4 brothers. And Florence and John always claimed they never told Gillian and Jennifer about their deceased sisters until the girls were much older. But, of course, it's possible that any of their brothers could have told the girls stuff about Jacqueline and Joanna.
They could have, but that would have been pretty morbid.
Yeah. But then there's Ryan Hammonds, which Ryan's story just completely fascinates me because we could do a 2-hour show on just Ryan. There's so much information about his case. According to his mother, Cindy, Ryan began having horrible nightmares around 2008 when he was just 4 years old. Then when he was 5, he said, "Mom, I have something I need to tell you. I used to be somebody else." The Oklahoma preschooler would often talk about going home to Hollywood and would cry for his mother to take him there. His mother said he would tell stories about meeting stars like Rita Hayworth, which is pretty odd that a 5-year-old in 2008 would even know who Rita Hayworth was.
Right. You think he'd be more inclined to be, towards SpongeBob and Blue's Clues.
Things like that, right? He talked about traveling overseas on lavish vacations, dancing on Broadway, and working for an agency where people would change their names. She said her son even recalled that the street he once lived on had the word rock in it. Cindy told Today, quote, "His stories were so detailed and they were so extensive that it just wasn't like a child could have made it up," end quote. Cindy had kept a lot of what Ryan said to herself, not even telling her husband, and she began to do some sleuthing. She checked out books about Hollywood from their local library, hoping something would help her son. When they found the picture, it changed everything. The picture was a publicity photo from the 1932 movie Night After Night, which was Mae West's first film. She turned to the page in the book, Ryan has said, and I said, "That's me. That's who I was." Cindy said she was shocked and only more confused because the man Ryan pointed to in the picture was just an extra in the film with no spoken lines.
Wow.
Cindy contacted Dr. Jim Tucker, MD, Associate Professor of Psychiatry and Neurobehavioral Sciences at, where else? The University of Virginia.
Oh, wow. No way.
Yeah, there's a connection there. It's pretty cool. So Tucker had spent more than a decade studying the cases of children, usually between the ages of 2 and 6, who say they remember a past life. These cases demand an explanation, Tucker has said. We can't just write them off or explain them away as just some sort of normal cultural thing. Tucker's office contains the files of more than 2,500 children, cases accumulated from all over the world by his predecessor, Ian Stevenson. So yeah, it's the same Ian Stevenson who worked with Gillian and Jennifer Pollock.
Right.
Through his research, Tucker discovered some pretty interesting patterns. For example, 70% of the children experiencing these past life memories say they died violent or unexpected deaths in their previous lives. And of those, males account for 73%, which closely corresponds to the statistics of those who die of unnatural causes in the general population. Tucker claims that there'd be no way to orchestrate that statistic so perfectly within those random 2,500 cases. Also determined to help Ryan and Cindy, a film archivist combed through original production materials for the movie Night After Night and was able to confirm just who the extra was, Marty Martin, who later became a powerful Hollywood agent and died in 1964. Dr. Tucker said, if you look at a picture of a guy with no lines in a movie and then tell me about his life, I don't think many of us would have come up with Marty Martin's.
No, I don't think so. That's pretty unbelievable.
It's pretty random, right? And but it's amazing at the same time. After digging through old records and tracking down Martin's own daughter, Tucker was able to confirm 55 separate details Ryan gave about his life as Marty Martin. For example, Martin wasn't just a movie extra. Just as Ryan had said, Martin had also danced on Broadway, traveled overseas to Paris, and worked at an agency where stage names were created. Tucker also discovered Ryan's claim that he lived on the street with the word rock in it was pretty darn close, because Martin lived at 825 North Roxbury Drive in Beverly Hills.
Now, there's no way for him to know all this information.
No, not at 5 years old. Like you said before, he's not going to be interested in those things.
No.
Mm-mm. Even initially disputed facts that Ryan gave turned out to be true. For example, sorry, my gum got stuck to the roof of my mouth. Even initially disputed facts that Ryan gave turned out to be true. For example, Martin's daughter grew up thinking her father had just one sister, but Dr. Tucker was able to confirm he actually had 2, just like Ryan said he did. But one of the most mind-blowing facts, at least to me, is that Ryan once said that he didn't see why God would let you get to be 61 and then make you come back as a baby.
That's quite insightful for a child of his age.
It sounds like something a
older man would
61-year-old man would say.
Exactly.
Dr. Tucker was sure, though, that this had to be false because Martin's death certificate listed his age as 59 years old when he died. But Tucker uncovered census records showing Martin was in fact born in 1903, meaning Ryan's statement, not Martin's official death certificate, was absolutely correct.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, that's one of my favorite reincarnation cases. It's so fascinating. But just like the Pollock sisters, Ryan's memories of his past life faded as he aged. And even though those 2 different cases, the children kind of let go of their past life memories, growing out of it isn't always the case. Especially when we look at Barbro Carlin and the renowned Egyptologist Dorothy Eady. So, Barbro Carlin was born in Sweden in 1954. From a young age, Barbro felt like she just didn't fit into her family, and she insisted that everyone call her Anne. Her parents initially dismissed her insistence as typical childhood make-believe. But then she began asking her parents where her real parents were and where Margot was.
Ooh.
She developed an aversion to taking showers and having her hair cut. And she had unexplained anxiety around men in uniform.
Oh, that's a red flag.
Yeah. When Barbara was born, Anne Frank's story was still relatively unknown. In fact, Barbara wasn't introduced to the Diary of Anne Frank until the 1960s. She was shocked by how much her teacher knew about her real family and her life before she went into hiding.
I bet she was.
A few years after her introduction to Anne Frank's story, Barbara's family vacationed in Amsterdam. By then, Anne Frank's diary was known worldwide, and the secret annex she called home had been turned into a museum. Amsterdam is notoriously difficult to navigate for non-native travelers, and at one point, Barbara's father stopped to ask for directions. According to Mysterious Universe, a local drew a map for them, but the family still struggled to find the Anne Frank house. Barbara told her family not to worry about it. She knew how to get there.
Now, how do you explain that?
Well, especially since they followed her through a maze of back streets and alleyways and arrived there supposedly in half the time it would have taken them if they followed the map.
There's no way for her to know that.
When they arrived at the house, Barbara mentioned that she remembered the exterior looking different, but she was excited to see her room because it was wallpapered with photos of her favorite people. According to reincarnation research, when Barbara entered the room, she found that the walls were bare. She became very visibly upset, and her mother asked a tour guide about the photos, hoping to ease her daughter's concerns. The guide told her that there had been photos plastered all along the walls, but because visitors frequently touched them, curators had taken them down for preservation. Barbara has not forgotten her past life, and she is an author and a public speaker. She was also acquainted with Anne Frank's cousin, who in his last years was convinced Barbara was his deceased relative. And then lastly, there is the case of Dorothy Eady. In 1907, 3-year-old Dorothy was pronounced dead after a fall down the stairs.
Oh, no.
Distraught, her parents carried her to her bed, and an hour later were shocked to find her restless and sitting upright and claiming she was a reborn ancient Egyptian priestess, Ben Treshet.
Oh, my God. What do you do at that point? Stay and comfort her or run out the front door?
But again, it was such a random thing, you know? She's this little girl in London, and now she's claiming that she was an Egyptian priestess.
I know. Can you imagine what was going through her parents' head?
Oh, I know. On a trip to the British Museum in 1908, Eady pressed her hands up to glass displays and knelt to kiss the feet of statues. It was a pretty bizarre sight for onlookers, especially when Eady sat down by a preserved mummy and insisted that she be left there. When her mother tried to pick her up, Eady is quoted as having said, "Leave me here. These are my people."
You go, girl. Wow.
According to a BBC TV documentary, after her trip, Eady's dreams took her to beautiful gardens surrounded by limestone columns. She would get up in the middle of the night, inconsolable, and beg her parents that her home was elsewhere and that they needed to take her there.
Oh, that's sad.
Well, it's interesting to me in so many of the cases, because they're so young, I think, a lot of the children cry and beg to be brought home. A few months later, Eady came across photographs of Egypt, including ones with hieroglyphs that she swore she recognized but didn't understand. Then she saw a photo of Abydos and the Temple of Seti I. "This is my home," Eady reportedly told her father. "This is where I used to live." Eady's obsession with Egypt continued through her teenhood and well into her married years. "I had only one aim in life," Eady is noted as saying, and that was to go to Abydos, to live in Abydos, and to be buried in Abydos. In 1933, Eady married an Egyptian man, and she moved to Egypt. She insisted on naming her first child, a son, after Egypt's 19th dynasty ruler, Seti. As per Egyptian custom, Eady renounced her birth name and began going by Seti, or the mother of Seti. During her marriage, Eady would get up in the middle of the night to write pages upon pages of hieroglyphs in an almost trance-like state. However, hardly anyone could decipher them.
Oh, I bet.
Pages and pages. Her marriage disintegrated, possibly because she was staying up all night.
That would do it.
And with her newfound freedom to continue her studies, Eady wrote a 70-page manuscript, which she referred to as her spirit guide. According to her spirit guide, Seti had been an ancient Egyptian priestess named Ben Treshet. She lived in the temple of Abydos during the reign of Pharaoh Seti I, and at the age of 14 became his paramour. Seti recalled having taken an oath of chastity and loyalism, and after becoming pregnant, she did what she had to do to protect Seti's honor. So there wasn't a lot of chastity going on.
Nope, not at all.
She claimed she took her own life before birthing the child. So, not surprisingly, her stories were met with wide criticism, but Eady wasn't deterred. Having dreamt of the central gardens in the temple of Seti for decades, she pointed to a highly eroded plot of land and told archaeologists to dig. They did, and they found the ruins of the garden.
Really?
Yes, the ones that she had dreamt about for years and years. Eady was eerily accurate in her description of water canals and the height of columns that no longer stood, translating some of the more arcane hieroglyphs with relative ease. In 1956, she became the first woman to work in the antiquities department at Abydos and took up residence in the temple itself. She always said she wanted to live there.
It's her destiny.
Yep. She would also lead archaeologists to a tunnel north of the temple, which had gone unnoticed for decades.
Wow.
She would live the rest of her days at the Temple of Abydos, insisting that an undiscovered library sits under it, filled with unseen religious texts and historical documents. As of September 2021, no excavation has validated or dismissed her claims. And Dorothy Eady passed away on April 21st, 1981.
Wow. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if they could, I know it takes a lot of money, a lot of resources, a lot of permits, a lot of permissions, but if they ever get the chance to excavate under there, they're going to find it.
They're going to find something.
Yeah.
But even without that, I mean, her story is astonishing, what she did know.
Mm-hmm. That's why I find it so fascinating.
Yeah, there's just no way to explain some of these stories.
Buzzsprout, let's get your podcast launched for free.
You know, we use Buzzsprout and we love it because Buzzsprout is hands down the best and easiest way to launch, promote, and track our podcast.
Whether you're looking for a new marketing channel, have a message you want to share with the world, or just think it would be fun to have your own talk show, podcasting is an easy, inexpensive, and fun way to expand your reach online.
And with Buzzsprout, your show can be online and listed in all the major podcast directories like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more within minutes of finishing your recording, just like ours.
You'll get a great-looking podcast website, audio players that you can drop into other websites, detailed analytics to see how people are listening, tools to promote your episodes, and more.
Podcasting isn't hard when you have the right partners, and the team at Buzzsprout is passionate about helping you succeed.
Following the link in the show notes lets Buzzsprout know we sent you, gets you a $20 Amazon gift card if you sign up for a paid plan, and helps support our show. Hey, did you know? Women in ancient Greece never worried about having a big butt. In fact, they were downright worshipped for it. Athenian males adored a big butt, so much so that they had a specific word for it, callipygian, or with beautiful buttocks. For those girls cursed with too tiny behinds, the Greeks invented posterior enhancers, a padded apparatus that lifted and tightened their rear end. Who'da thunk it?
Wow, dear, that was quite the who'da thunk it. I mean, you would have been an absolute goddess back in ancient Greece.
Wow. What are you trying to say then? Are you saying I have a big butt?
So, what do you think I'm talking about tonight?
I have no idea. You're going to have to tell me.
That I am. I'm talking about the Great Molasses Flood.
Is that like a Willy Wonka kind of thing?
No, definitely not. But it was an actual event that was pretty disastrous. The afternoon of January 15th, 1919, was unusually mild for Boston, with the temperatures over 40 degrees. Commercial Street hummed with the sounds of laborers, clopping horses, and a nearby elevated train platform. A group of men sat inside the Engine 31 firehouse, playing cards and eating their lunch. Taking advantage of the unseasonably warm winter weather, the 50-foot-tall steel molasses tank that held 2.3 million gallons of molasses was making its usual groans, but people were used to it and didn't pay much attention. In fact, near the tank, 8-year-old Antonio D'Estasio, his sister Maria, and another boy named Pasquale Lentoso were gathering firewood for their families. It wasn't uncommon for the neighborhood children to use their fingers to swipe a molasses treat from the leaks that continuously oozed from the tank. At his family's home overlooking the tank, bartender Martin Clardy was napping in his bed, worn out from a late-night shift at his saloon, the Pen and Pencil Club. For bystanders, the first clue that something was amiss was when they noticed a sound that was different from the usual thrum of the overhead train. The Boston Evening Transcript later described it as a deep rumble. At around 12:40 p.m., the mid-afternoon calm was broken by the sound of a metallic roar. Before residents had the time to register what was happening, the recently refilled molasses tank ripped wide open, unleashing all 2.3 million gallons of molasses, 1.5 times denser than water. The molasses moved like a mudslide or avalanche. The Boston Post later wrote, "A rumble, a hiss, some say a boom and a swish, and the wave of molasses swept out." At first, a 15-foot wall of syrup swept over Commercial Street at 35 miles per hour, obliterating all the people, horses, buildings, and electrical poles in its path. Even the solid steel supports of the elevated train platform snapped.
Holy cow. 35 miles per hour it came out of that thing.
Some fast-moving molasses.
Which you would not expect.
Not at all.
Isn't the saying slow as molasses?
Yeah.
Wow.
Not in this case.
Not at all.
The three children, Antonio, Marie, and Pasquale, were instantly swallowed by the torrent. Maria suffocated to death. Pasquale was killed after being struck by a railroad car, carried away by the torrent. Antonio lived, but suffered a severe head injury from being flown into a light post.
Holy cow. That's awful.
Mm-hmm. The liquid syrup seeped into every crevice of the city. According to author and historian Stephen Polillo, it ran out onto subways, payphones, and even in the troughs provided at the curbside to the city horses.
So it filled everything.
Everything. The Engine 31 firehouse was not clean off its foundation, causing its second story to collapse into its first. In the nearby Clarity house, Martin woke from his nap. "I was in bed on the third floor of my house when I heard a deep rumble. When I awoke, I was in several feet of molasses." His house had crumbled around him, and it was smashed against the elevated train platform. Clarity nearly drowned before climbing on his floating bed frame. He used the makeshift boat to rescue his sister Teresa, but his mother and younger brother were among those killed in the disaster. "Once the low rumbling sound was heard, no one had a chance to escape," said the Boston Globe. "It was as if the buildings seemed to cringe up, as though they were made of pasteboard." Isaac Yetton was hauling a load of automobile inner tubes into a shed when he heard a snap. According to court transcripts, he saw an electric railway car swinging towards him along with bottles and freight boxes. He ran towards the harbor, only to be overtaken by a wave of molasses. He was carried 35 feet before the wave slammed him against a door. Injured and completely covered in molasses, he managed to grab a ladder thrown to him by a foreman. 78-year-old Elizabeth O'Brien and her sister had walked out of her Commercial Street home in order to do some washing. The wave knocked her unconscious and smashed the washing tub into her jaw, breaking it. When she woke up, her entire home was gone. She didn't find her sister until days later, in the hospital, where she was recovering from a stroke.
I know that the listeners can't see me, obviously, but I just keep shaking my head because I can't believe this.
It's hard to fathom. There was so much molasses that the entirety of Boston Harbor turned brown.
Wow.
Almost as quickly as it had come, the molasses wave receded, revealing a half-mile swath of crushed buildings, crumpled bodies, and waist-deep muck. Here and there struggled to form. Whether it was an animal or a human being, it was impossible to tell, a Boston reporter wrote. Only an upheaval, a thrashing about in the sticky mess, showed where there was any life. Police and firefighters arrived at the disaster scene within minutes, as did over 100 sailors from the Navy ship USS Nantucket. The first responders struggled to wade through the quicksand like molasses, which had begun to harden in the winter chill.
Oh, no. So now it's freezing.
Frozen molasses.
That has to be, well, I don't know how thick it was on the ground, whether it was, I guess it doesn't matter. I mean, ugh.
At the Engine 31 firehouse, the men from Lunchtime Card Game were trapped in a molasses-filled pocket of space on the collapsed first floor. It took several hours of cutting away floorboards and debris before most of the firemen were freed, but not all. One of the trapped men had run out of strength and drowned.
That's a horrible way to go.
It's pretty frightening. The Purity Distilling Company owned the molasses tank, which had been built in 1915, when World War I had increased demand for industrial alcohol. Caribbean molasses was an integral ingredient in producing alcohol for munitions manufacturing, and the actual contents of the tank were the property of the United States Industrial Alcohol. Because of the demand, the construction of the tank had been rushed. The containers started to groan and peel almost immediately, and it often leaked molasses onto the street. Remember how I had said that the neighborhood kids used to swipe molasses right off the sides?
Yep. I didn't think anything of it when you mentioned it. I thought, oh, it's probably supposed to do that. How nice for them.
Yeah, it wasn't there just for a sticky treat. At least one USIA employee warned his bosses that the tank was structurally unsound. Yet outside of recalking it, the company took little to no action whatsoever. By 1919, the largely Italian-Irish immigrant families on Commercial Street had grown accustomed to hearing the rumbles and metallic creaks emanating from the tank. There is some speculation that because the tank was in an area most populated by immigrants, the USIA was slow to respond to the complaints.
Of course.
In addition, the molasses that was stored in the tank was used alongside with highly flammable substances like TNT and nitroglycerin.
What? I mean, I guess it makes sense if they needed all that stuff to make the munitions, whatever they were making, but holy cow.
It still seems like they would have stored them a ways away from each other.
Yeah.
So from the very beginning, the tank was like a ticking time bomb.
I guess so.
To add to the perfect storm, warm molasses was added to the cold contents just 2 days earlier, and the tank was filled to capacity. The tank's temperature fluctuated drastically, swelling the tank to the point of bursting. In the wake of the disaster, the victims filed 119 different lawsuits against United States Industrial Alcohol. The plaintiffs argued that the molasses tank had been too thin and too shoddily built, causing the leaking from the very beginning. The size of the tank, 50 feet tall and 90 feet wide, had always been a safety issue and should have never been built in the neighborhood. Many employees came forward claiming that they had tried to have the tank fixed, but they said that the owners continuously tried to cover up the leaks by simply painting the tank brown.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The USIA fought back by saying that the real cause of the rupture was sabotage. They blamed Italian anarchist groups, stating that in 1918, a man called the main office, threatening to blow up the tank with dynamite. They said the disaster was clearly caused by evilly disposed persons.
Yeah, sure it was.
The lawsuit proceedings against the USIA dragged on for 5 years. Over 1,500 exhibits were introduced and some 1,000 witnesses testified, including explosive experts, flood survivors, and USIA employees. The closing arguments alone took 11 weeks, but in April 1925, State Auditor Hugh W. Ogden finally ruled that the United States Industrial Alcohol was to blame for the disaster.
Oh, good. Good for you, Hugh.
He's the man. Luckily, the Great Molasses Flood disaster and the subsequent ruling paved the way for modern regulation. The Boston Building Department started requiring architects and engineers to include a signature in written calculations about any building plans before construction could begin. Soon the requirement became standard practice across the country, and then it became a law. All in all, the damage to the buildings, many of which fell into the Boston Harbor, equaled more than $100 million in today's money, if we adjusted it for inflation.
Wow.
But that isn't the end of the story. Boston still needed to clean up the mess. Because it was winter, the syrup froze on streets and buildings. Simply trying to wash it away by opening city fire hydrants didn't do much good. Officials couldn't wait for the molasses to thaw naturally because of the fear of dangerous bacteria developing. It was a firefighter who suggested using salt water. He proposed that the brine would cut down the sugar, and it worked. More than 400 Bostonians flushed millions of gallons of salt water through their streets, then used brooms and saws to dig up the melting sludge. Even then, the sweet scent of molasses still hung over the North End for several weeks, and the waters of Boston Harbor remained stained brown until the summer.
Wow. I did not think when you started that story that it was going to be remotely as, I mean, you said it was disastrous, but I wasn't expecting it to be that disastrous. That's frightening and amazing at the
It's
same
incredible.
time. Yep.
And I'm wondering if they still smell
Maybe.
the molasses to this day.
Maybe. Yeah, I don't know what's there now, but it's possible, I
Well,
suppose.
if you're from Boston and you know anything about this, leave us a comment.
Yeah, let us know. I'd be curious to know the answer to that.
It's either that or we're going to have to take a trip to Boston to see for ourselves.
We'll be standing in the middle of the street sniffing the air.
Let's say those damn New Yorkers. Well, I think that about wraps it up for this episode.
Yes, but before we go, I just want to say thank you to all of you for supporting us and our show by downloading our episodes and listening to us, because we really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, we really do. And don't be shy to tell your friends, family, and your kooky neighbors and like-minded colleagues to come check us out.
Yeah, so they can be wanderers too.
Yeah. Well, y'all take care. We'll see you soon.
Thank you for joining us. We look forward to traveling with you again to the places where our minds wander.
If you like what you heard, please take a moment and provide us with a 5-star rating and a comment. It really helps us move up the list so people can find us. See you next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.